purpose of this episode is to figure out, or for me to explain to you, how it feels to draw. Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to decide what you're going to draw, and then you have to create an optical illusion. The thing is that this big flat screen, that's the problem. This blank page is it looks like it's flat, and whatever you're drawing, has to look three-dimensional and sit within a three-dimensional space. So we had to find a way to turn this flat page into a three-dimensional space and put three-dimensional objects into the three-dimensional space. And the easiest way to do that is if you trick yourself into thinking that this flat page, this flat chunk of pixels or ink on paper, is in fact a three-dimensional space. Now, I know the tricking part sounds like a bit of a mind bender, so let's just start with a photograph. And a photograph is wonderful because a photograph is a perfect example of an optical illusion. We can see it gives us a feeling of depth and space and perspective. You can tell that I'm standing on the streets of Italy when I took this picture. I feel like, hey, I feel like I'm right back in Florence right now. There's the Duomo, or the dome, the Duomo sitting off in the background. I can feel, hey, there's a car sitting, maybe about 7 or 8 yards, about 10 yards away from me. And I can tell how far away things are just by looking at them, in this picture. It gives me this great sense of depth. And so when you're, this whole thing, it's still a flat screen with pixels on it, and yet, it gives us the illusion that, hey, we're standing in the streets of Florence, and that there are buildings off in the distance with this giant cathedral off in the background. So drawing is about illusions, is about optical illusions, and you're basically creating this three-dimensional space with things that sit and have depth. So if I wanted to, I can add to the illusion. I can draw a line that appears to stick to the ground. The line that I draw here appears to stick to the wall. I can make lines that stick to objects in 3 dimensions. These are three-dimensional. They have the sense. If I draw a post, I can draw like a post sticking out of the ground. The post seems to be sitting really, really close to us, and the post over there can be sitting really far away from us. And by using the principle of overlapping, the overlapping principle, this post. Actually, let me just chop it off like that. There, that post appears to be just over the hill, because the road appears to go over, and the post is just, the post is overlapped by the ground. There's all this perspective information in this picture that gives us the sense of depth. So when you're drawing lines, they have to be drawn in relation to other things. You have to feel that. You have to feel the depth. When you look at my mouse cursor, you can kind of tell, hey, if I draw something here, it'll be far away. If I draw something here, it'll be really close. Or if I wanted to, I can, let me just clear what I've done. I can put let's put a dot on the ground there, and figure, well, from this dot, maybe about a yard or a meter over, we'll put another dot. Now I can connect these two lines, and I can figure, well, what do I want a big box to be sitting? Oh, heck, what the hell with the box? Let's put a car. So if I wanted to add another car, I can put another dot there, another dot there. So the car is about this wide. The car is about this tall. And you can see where my mouse cursor is, but you can't tell where I'm looking. You can't tell where my eyeballs are pointing. And right now, I'm not necessarily staring at my cursor all the time, even though it's drawing. And that's because I have to keep my eyes on everything else and all the other lines of this box in order to make sure that something is in proper perspective. Because if I'm not careful, if I oops, let me draw the wheel hubs. If I'm not careful in the way that I add all of my lines, I can add something that is out of perspective and shatters the illusion rather than reinforces it. I can make, oops, it's a the 5-minute mark. You know, I can make it seem as if this thing is really sitting on the ground. You know, even without color, even without, you know, painting it up and adding shading or lighting, you know, these lines appear to be sitting in space. Because I've defined how big the car is. That's the other thing, is that it really helps you a lot if you can say how big things are at the start and then figure out where within this big block, you know, are all the little details, you know, where the car doors, where is, let's put a little side view mirror here, you know, where do the windows, oops, I want it to be a 2-door type. So this line, you know, is running along the side of the vehicle. All of my lines either run along the edge of it or they stick to the geometry in some way, you know. And so I'm constantly, you know, reinforcing. Oops, so we want the license plate, European style license plate down there. You know, all of my lines are sticking to the car. You know, as you add detail, this is all the details that I add, you know, adhere to this structure that I defined when I drew this big box. Now I can go and I can erase, you know, the structure of the box, leaving behind all the detail. I mean, it doesn't have to be a car. You can draw a dinosaur. You can draw, you know, oh, I don't know. George Lucas is probably going to sue me now. Doesn't have to be cars. This is the wonderful thing about drawing, is that drawing, you can do everything, you can do pretty much the same things that you can do, you know, in a piece of 3-dimensional software, except that you don't have to worry about, you know, software crashing. You don't have to worry about, you know, the learning curve. How do I deal with bevel and extrude and, you know, all these different 3-dimensional tools? It's all you. All you need is your sense of depth and perspective that you use every day of your life. Otherwise, you know, you'd be bashing into things all the time. And, you know, trick yourself into the illusion. Once you can trick yourself into the illusion, you can use, you know, the your sense of perspective and depth that you already have, and then the drawing becomes effortless. So every line that I add, you know, I have to be looking at other objects in the scene, because every line that I add has to be held relative, you know, to everything else. It has to be in proper perspective to other things. And that's why it's so hard. That's why I decided not to start with a blank page, because with a blank page, you know, it's like starting off in the deep end of the swimming pool. You know, if you've never swam before. I can't swim, by the way. But, you know, it's just, it gets really, really tough, you know, to deal with things, because, you know, you don't know whether you're doing anything right or wrong, because nothing's been decided yet. You know, in this case, we have all this wonderful perspective that we can use to tell us whether or not the lines I've drawn are right or wrong, and then it's easy to make corrections and fix things up. So, you know, have fun with this, guys. Get yourself some, you know, don't just watch me do these things. I highly suggest that you find some old newspapers or magazines, get out the pen, magic marker, you know, and make your own additions in 3-dimensional space. Get used to the sense of adding your own objects to a 3-dimensional space, because next episode we're going to start with a blank page, and I'll show you how to define the 3-dimensional space, and then from there you can add things to that 3-dimensional space. So what else do I want to say? You can have lines, you know, I showed you how lines can stick to things. This is what drawing's all about. It's a lot of fun. You know, you can draw anything you want. So anyway, I guess I'll catch you guys later. I'm having so much fun. I hope you found today's episode useful and entertaining. To watch other episodes or show your support for the series, please visit us at 10minutedrawing.blogspot.com.